Hello, everyone. My name is Marianne Urban, and I am the Curator of Education here at the Brigham City Museum of Art and History. We're very excited to bring this really fun, fun-filled, art-filled night with Betsy Cannon to you this evening. Betsy is one of the artists featured in our current exhibition, Evolving Perceptions, Art Quilts by the Studio Art Quilt Associate, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming Region. This exhibit is here at the museum until the 5th of September. And I know you already see Betsy's piece behind me. You can see the rest of them here. Just come on by. We'll share our hours later in this evening. But first, I want to welcome Betsy and thank you so very much for spending time with us this evening. Betsy Cannon was born in New Mexico and raised in West Texas, which she thinks has influenced her love for the outlandish. She's been making art quilts for almost 52 years, right?
Right.
Thereabouts, while raising two wonderful creative children. Betsy and her husband, Laurie, live in central Colorado and part of the year in rural New Hampshire. Her quilts have been exhibited internationally and are in many private and public collections. So welcome.
Thank you. I thought I would tell you a couple more things about me that you might be interested in. For the most part, I make story quilts, though I have made other kinds of quilts, but only one traditional piece quilt, which was plenty for me. I use antique fabrics, mostly commercial fabrics, but I do use some hand-dyed fabrics. I use oilcloth, buttons, beads, lots of puffy paint, and in that quilt behind Marianne, I used chicken toenails, plastic bones, things like that. I don't have a very fancy machine. I have a wonderful machine. It's a Bernina 1090. And the things that it does that are important to me are needle down, knee lift, and Freemason quilting. So I don't need a very fancy machine. I do need a reliable machine. So that's what I have. I've only sewn through my own finger twice. And something that I think has been important to me for probably 30 years. I'm now in 3 design critique groups, and that makes the huge difference to me, because when you're stuck on something, if you trust the people that are in your design critique group, then you can go to them and say, I'm having trouble with this. I can't decide what it is that's wrong. And they will give you that information. So, otherwise, I have a studio. It's on the lower level of our house so that I can run down there while I'm waiting for the clothes in the dryer and add a little bit more puffy paint to a quilt or whatever. So it's not especially big, but it's chock full of stuff. So
like so many
really
other quilters.
All I can say, Marianne. Maybe people have questions.
Yeah, well, let's see if we've got any questions so far. If not, I'll start with my own. Let's talk a little bit more about your studio with the creative and, like you said, outlandish things that you make. You talked a little bit about the commercial materials you have, but I know for a fact that you have huge drawers full of beads and puffy paint and all sorts of things. And I know so many people ask us all the time when we're giving tours, where do they find all this stuff?
Well, I have a lot of sequins, but I have been to the mother lode of sequins, which is Hong Kong, and I have sat on filthy floors in my nice linen shorts and just spooned hundreds and hundreds of sequins into little plastic bags. I don't know, just, you know, I'm pretty old, so I've collected a lot of stuff over time. And then people give me things all the time. People give me commercial fabric because they've decided to only use hand-dyed fabric. And people give me, like a friend of mine has stopped quilting. So she said, would you like to have my button collection? I said, sure. She said, I'll send it to you from a friend of mine, with a friend of mine. So I ran into that person. She said, oh, could you please take your buttons? And I thought, well, sure, I'll take them. And she said, they're in the trunk of my car. And I said, well, I'll just go get them. She said, oh, you'll need help. There are 200 pounds of buttons.
Pounds.
So and a lot of buttons. So when people know that you use certain materials, they give them to you. And because I'm in 3 critique groups, those people all know that if they have spare buttons or puffy paint or paint of any kind, they give me those things. So lucky me.
Well, and with that said, let's take a look at tonight's featured piece, Baba Yaga's house on the Prowl. Let me get it up here. All right, so can you see that?
I can see it behind you. I can't see it on the screen.
Okay. Let me, okay.
It's coming. There it is.
All right, so something that I love, oh, hold on. All right, can you still see it on your screen?
Yes.
Oh, shoot, no.
Oops.
Stop. Hold on just a second. Sorry, everybody. Just one moment. Okay, let's try this. Thanks everybody for, dealing with me and, okay. All right.
There it is.
So just to get started, I want everybody to know that yes, Betsy does have quite a love for chickens. You see that a lot throughout her other works, and we'll show examples of those in a minute, but this is Baba Yaga's house on the Prowl. Like she said, Betsy uses a lot of storytelling. And so before we get into what the materials you used, what is it about Baba Yaga that is a muse to you?
Well, actually, when you said I love chickens, I actually like chickens okay, but I really like their feet.
Right, yes, very
That's what I
specifically.
really like is their feet, because they're kind of creepy and scaly and interesting. So I've always kind of liked chicken feet, and I've made way back, 30 years ago, I was making quilts with chickens on them. And then a friend of mine was reading Women Who Run with the Wolves, and she told me this story. So in the mornings when we would walk, she would tell me this story about Baba Yaga and how there was this house with chicken legs. And so I hadn't really heard the story. I just knew there was a house with chicken legs. And so the first quilt I ever made, I made for an exhibit at Children's Hospital in Denver. And they had it on display, and Children's Hospital wanted to buy it, but they thought it was a little bit creepy to have it at Children's Hospital with human bones around the bottom. And so I said, well, that's fine. And somebody bought it. So then I made another one for them without human bones around the bottom. And somebody else bought it. And so I decided I was finished making quilts for them. But I have made a number of quilts about Baba Yaga's house. So yeah, this is the most recent one, and actually this is my favorite.
I have to say, it's been a crowd favorite at the museum. So I understand that you've used various fabrics here. Your puffy paint. People need to know. I think I get the most questions about what you've used on the border for the edges. But that's oilcloth, isn't it?
It's oilcloth, and oilcloth is what you usually find for tablecloths in Mexican restaurants. And the thing about there are two kinds of sort of shiny fabric. One is oilcloth, which has kind of a grid inside of it that makes it pretty stiff. And then there's also laminated fabric, which is much, much softer and doesn't work as well. So people think it must be very hard to pleat it like that, but actually it's not. It's just a matter of folding it while you're sewing it. And you can sew through it like butter. It's actually no problem at all. And I've made miles of the stuff.
Something that our audience can see a little bit, but I would recommend people coming down to the museum so you can see this in person, is your use of applique. Now, from what I can tell, and from what you've said in the past, you quilt the applique and then stitch it on. Is that correct?
Sometimes that's true, and sometimes I stitch it on when I'm working on it. Actually, if I'm doing a project that I'm trying to be really careful about how much time it takes me, because I'm doing it for maybe a commission, I try to make it as quickly as I can so it's not as expensive. And so I will applique and quilt at the same time onto the background. But if I'm trying to make something that's more three-dimensional, I will make it separately, quilt it, and then apply it to the top of the quilt. So it's much more three-dimensional. And if I'm beading chicken legs, like in this quilt, people probably know, but the legs are solid beads. And if I'm doing that, then I usually do that separately. It's too much work to have to sew through all those layers. So what I do is I sew it onto black felt and then I stitch it on.
And I think that's something that, that is very, very unique about your pieces. Okay, so one thing that people still can't quite believe is everything that you've got going on with the house. We had somebody put a scavenger hunt together, and she brought her grandchildren in the other day. And one of all the things going on with this quilt, this lantern here was what was on the scavenger hunt, which we found to be pretty fun. Now, you said once that your quilts have a cute quality to them, but you also want them to be weird. So there's usually elements that that give you that same weird experience, right?
Right.
And in this one in particular, there's something in the fringe, and I think. Do you want to start talking about that?
Well, as if a house on chicken legs wasn't weird enough, when I was making it, I mean, there's the story has a house on chicken legs, and it doesn't really talk anything about having a nest, but I think having a house with a skirt is more fun than having just a house. So I've often used with things with chicken legs, I use a little nest. And so in this nest is for something special, I attached a number of chicken toenails. And it's odd but one time somebody said to me, I have a present for you. And I thought, oh, goody, I hope it's cupcakes. And she was like, it's this jar. And she gave me this jar. And I thought, what is that? And I opened it and I went through it and she said, it's chicken toenails. Would you like them? I was like, oh, yes. And in fact, I was going on a trip and I knew that I was going to be working on this quilt. And so I went through, at the airport, I went through TSA and I just had this little tiny suitcase and all it had in it was fabric, thread, all the things I need to make this quilt. And the TSA guy pulled me aside. I was like, what? And he said, he pulled out the jar of chicken toenails and he said, what is this? I was like, chicken toenails. And he said, lady, put them back in the suitcase and zipped it up, sent me along.
All right. Well, I think if nothing else, that might be useful information to people. Chicken toenails seem to go just fine through TSA. I adore that you are known, you know, you have this group of people who know you and appreciate your art so well that they'll give you their buttons, their fabric, their chicken toenails. I think that that's something that's real special. I really do. And a lot of other artists, no matter the medium, I think that's a show of support for any artist, which is really fun, really. I think. Tell me more about some of the other stories. Oh, well, actually, there are a few other Baba Yaga quilts, like you said, that you've made in the past. And there's one, I think, in particular that you had quite a lot of fun with. And I think, let me see if I can get it up here. Because Baba Yaga can be a hip and happening lady in the world we live in, right? So let me pull this one up. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this one.
Well, and when I made this quilt, I was thinking about if Baba Yaga got a day job, what would she do? And I thought, well, she would drive a chicken bus in Latin America. And so, and for people who don't know this, but when school buses in the US are tired, they are purchased in Mexico, and they're all dolled up with, they have lots more chrome on them and they're all painted and they're very fancy. So I just love those chicken buses in Latin America. And so I thought, well, gosh, okay, well, she would have a chicken bus, but then it wouldn't have tires on it. It would have chicken legs. So then I put chicken legs on it. And you can see that there are chicken footprints around the chicken legs because I do happen to have a chicken footprint rubber stamp, which I always love to use. And then there would be chickens in the bus and chickens on top of the bus. So, so I was thinking about that when I came up with the idea of this quilt. So anyway, that's a quilt that I made, and it was in Visions last year, and it's kind of fun to go to the Vision show and see it on display.
And yeah, another thing you mentioned when we were talking about this quilt before is, of course, Baba Yaga would end up in Latin America, right? She's just going to get around anywhere and anytime. And I thought that really also speaks to the kind of character that Baba Yaga is, not only in, you know, the origin stories in Russian folklore, but just generally. And I think that a lot of educators and parents, sometimes they need to embellish the story that their kid has asked them to read yet again. And I think this is a very beautiful way of expanding Baba Yaga's story.
Well, I'm all about embellishment, Marianne.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are in a most beautiful way. Um, now, and on that, I know we talked a little bit about before. Anyway, we talked a little bit about your work with Dia de los Muertos depictions.
Right. I've been to Mexico for Day of the Dead several times, and I have made a whole series of Day of the Dead quilts. I think it's a really interesting holiday, and I've made silk screens of skeletons and things like that. So on my website, I have a number of Day of the Dead quilts that I've made in the past, and I'm always good for a Day of the Dead quilt.
I'm going to share with everyone. I'm pretty sure that this is my favorite. This one's called Joy Parade, right? I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and go ahead, just tell us a little bit about this one.
It's actually, well, I silk screened a number of skeletons onto black fabric, and then I cut them out and appliqued them on. But you'll notice that some of those skeletons are chicken skeletons.
Yeah, I hope
And
everybody can
just
see
for
that.
a note about marketing. So I made this quilt, and I thought, oh, I think I'll just put this up on Facebook. And I put it up on Facebook, and I sold it in 4 minutes, a record.
Mm-hmm.
So don't hide your quilts away. If you want to show them and you'd like to sell them, put them up on Facebook or some other internet site, and you'd be surprised how many people will see them, and people love things like that, and they'll buy them.
That's a really good point. We are all, like, many of the quilts in Evolving Perceptions are for sale. Some of them, and some of these will go to other galleries. Some of these will go back to the artists, and who knows what life they'll live after that. But it's always interesting to see what people buy, what people bring into their lives artistically. There were let me see. Let's see if there are any questions so far from our viewing audience. Oh, somebody wanted to know about the clouds. Because I think that's a good question, because a lot of your clouds are a bit similar in some of your pieces. The way that, I think the way they swirl, especially.
Okay, well, I can tell you the way that I do that. When I'm free motion quilting the sky, I like to do just these swirls, or and then when I finish with the swirls, as you might imagine, I think, well, that's kind of boring. And so what I do is I just squirt puffy paint onto them, and I smear it with my finger. I mean, it's not very complicated what I do. None of my techniques are very complicated, but I'm maybe braver than most people, because once you've already quilted a quilt, you think, oh my God, what if I ruin it? But I guess that's not the worst thing that happens to people. So there I go. I just squirt some paint onto it. And I guess if it didn't look good, I just put more paint on.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people who feel the same thing. And that's one thing that I love about these artist chats, is that people get the idea of what things they can do around the house, that they already have these things around the house, and they can just go at it. Now, something I hear also, just generally, we get asked, what are artists doing now in quarantine, or is the effects of the coronavirus, or the other social things that are happening. in our world right now, under lockdown, as people like to call it, is that affecting your art or influencing it?
I would say that it's interesting because I belong to these three different critique groups. Two of them are not meeting except on Zoom, but they are meeting on Zoom, which I don't find very inspiring myself. But what we've done is we just email out to the group a picture of what we're doing if we want to show what we've been working on, or we want to talk about what we're working on. We send it ahead of time because it makes us kind of nauseous to have to walk around looking at stuff.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell. So it's much easier to tell from a picture what you're working on. So, but one of the groups that most of the people live somewhat nearby, we've been meeting outside, and it's much more satisfying to be able to actually see what people are working on and be able to pass it around. So I have to say I haven't been particularly inspired because I'm very inspired by popular culture and maybe going to the art museum to see very exciting, to me, artists like Nick Cave, or artists that use a lot of exotic materials or a lot of embellishments. So I don't find the quarantine especially inspiring, but I have been working still. So anyway.
Well, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we're eagerly awaiting anything and everything that you make.
Mm-hmm. That's really nice.
Well, it's a wonderful thing that as a museum we're able to do, to bring people these, a new perspective on quilting, and just so that everybody can keep this in mind, the basic definition of a quilt is 2 pieces of fabric stitched together. So, and it could be anything and everything as long as it fits that definition.
That's right. And a binding to a quilt does not have to be just something sewn around the edge and turned under. I found that when I joined a group in Denver 30 years ago, that every single person was finishing their quilt in the same way. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so boring. Why would they do that? And they were showing, you do this special technique so that you have a square corner. And I thought, well, how interesting is that? To have square corners. So anyway, you can use anything on a quilt. It doesn't have to be something that's sold at a quilt shop.
All very important points. Well, I want to thank you, Betsy. We'll from here we're gonna watch a video, a retelling of a story, a Baba Yaga story. We're fortunate enough to have worked with the Burlington County Library System in New Jersey. They have this wonderful Halloween, scary stories series. And they happened a couple years ago to feature Joanna Cole's Bony Legs. And so we'll watch this and see if after that, we'll see if there are any other questions.
Okay, great. There's no sound.
Marianne, we're not getting any sound on the video.
Oh, no sound? Okay. Sorry, everyone. I was just told that we're not getting any sound on the video. Let me see what I can do about that. What about now? Anything?
It's paused.
Sorry, everyone, when we tried this earlier, I swear that it worked. Anything?
You know what? We got a couple more questions in the comments, and maybe we can just share out the video on our Facebook right after this so people can watch it. Does that work?
Yeah, I think that works, if that works with you, Betsy.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So thank you for helping us with that, Alana. And okay, so some follow-up questions, and then we'll close our evening today, and then post this wonderful reading of Bony Legs by Joanna Cole from the Burlington County Library System. So we do have a couple more questions. I know you mentioned this at the top, but Betsy, if you could once again go over what kind of equipment you use.
Well, I just use the Bernina 1090 sewing machine. It's it has a number of stitches on it, but I don't really use them except for I use free motion quilting, and I use zigzag, and very little else do I use. But it's very powerful, and it will go through a bunch of layers of fabric, which I really need oftentimes. And then I sew whatever I want to. I mean, I sew, you know, I'll have maybe 5 or 6 layers of fabric that I'm sewing through. Eventually, like in the quilt behind you, all that greenery at the bottom is a number of layers of fabric. So when I sewed that on, I was probably sewing through about 5 layers. Mm. And I also use a lot of Wonder Under. In fact, I often will put Wonder Under behind the entire top layer and behind the entire backing, so that I can have 3 or 4 or 5 layers of Wonder Under, but it makes it so much easier for me to be able to place fabrics and then iron them on temporarily until I can stitch them down. Does that answer your question? Yeah,
I do believe it does. And yeah, some of those tricks and some of those tricks can be really helpful to anybody sewing anything, whether it's a quilt, a dress, a bag of some kind. And I know that you've got like Bernina's, those, not that I'm not making any endorsements on behalf of myself, a museum, whomever. I will say that Bernina's are pretty great. And quite a number of quilters, of artists will usually have Bernina's.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's very popular, especially if a very good sewing machine store in your town that sells Bernina's. That is very helpful. And if you do have a Bernina, another thing that helps is to have a new needle.
Myself, I forget to do that, honestly, and then I'll be you know, halfway down a seam or stitching something, and I'll be frustrated, and then that little voice in my head will say, yep, it's the needle.
Use a new needle. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Betsy, thank you once again for your time. Thank you for sharing your talents, your artistry, not only in this show with Baba Yaga's house on the Prowl, but also the many pieces that you've created and shared through over 50 years of your career in this wonderful medium. I also want to thank the Studio Art Quilt Associates. They are an international group of art quilters whose mission is to bring to everyone's mind the expanding idea of what a quilt can be, the artistry of it all, and the artists who make them. And in particular, the Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming region of SAQA, as it's colloquially known, for putting this show together. Evolving Perceptions originally showed last year at a museum in Loveland, Colorado, and we were fortunate to have be its next stop. You'll be able to find tonight's, we've recorded tonight's event, and you'll be able to view that on our Facebook page. You'll also find it on our YouTube page. Links to both will be on our website, which is brighamcitymuseums.org. As I mentioned before, this exhibition is up until Saturday, the 5th of September. Our regular hours are 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. Tuesday through Friday, and 1 p.m. till 5 p.m. on Saturdays. And groups of 5 and more can call to have a tour, or we have regularly scheduled tours, and that information is also on our Facebook page and website. So thank you everyone for showing up and watching. If you are watching this if you're watching this and it's not live, then that's okay. Ask your questions anyway, and we'll see what we can do to get them answered.
Great.
So thanks, everyone.
Bye.